After dropping a tough loss on the road to conference rival Central Missouri last week, the Pittsburg State women's basketball team got back on track this week by winning both of their MIAA games. How's it going, Gorilla Nation? And welcome back for this week's edition of the Gorilla 2-Minute Drill. As always, for Pittsburg State Athletics, I'm your host Jake Faber, here to catch you up on the sports news from around campus. And topping that sports news this week is the men's and women's basketball teams. In 2011, the Pittsburg State men's basketball team exceeded expectations, making it to the championship round of the MIAA postseason tournament as a number 7 seed. Jake Faber reporting from the MIAA basketball tournament in downtown Kansas City, where despite the drastic weather changes we've experienced over the past few days, one thing has remained constant, and that one thing being the impressive finishes that we've seen on the women's side of the bracket. There's no doubt that early on in the season, Bullard, Porter, and Hayes have already made a name for themselves. Pitt State wide receiver John Brown does not play the game of college football for glory. He doesn't play the game for recognition, and he doesn't play the game for national championships. What John Brown plays for is much closer to his heart than any of those things could ever be, because what he plays the game for is a seat in the stands that will unfortunately always remain empty.
That night, at the club, with a couple of friends, and trying to make the peace, friends got into it with a couple of people. We heard that he was sitting in the car while they was fighting and everything because he was talking about he was ready to go back to school. He didn't want no trouble. The boys ran to the car and they got their guns and shot my brother one time in the head and 2 times in the chest.
Number 1, number 3, number 4. It seems somewhat unfitting that the first 3 names that you see on the Gorillas roster are the names of the team's 3 lone freshmen. And while most freshmen in the MIAA spend the better part of their first years getting acquainted with the bench, Jake Bullard, Caleb Porter, and Denton Hayes have found themselves in a position to make an impact early in their career on Kevin Muff's team. However, their single-digit uniform numbers and early contributions aren't the only thing that these 3 players have in common. After playing AAU ball together for the past few years, all 3 found themselves at Pittsburg State, expecting to blend into the background.
I'm really happy with the playing time that I get right now because I expected to come in and not really play that much, kind of just sit out basically my first year.
How's it going, Gorilla Nation? And welcome back for this week's edition of the Gorilla 2-Minute Drill. As always, for Pittsburg State Athletics, I'm your host Jake Faber, here to catch you up on the sports news from around campus. And topping that sports news this week is the men's and women's basketball teams. With their preseason camps already underway, the Gorillas have began preparing for their 2012 exhibition schedules, which will feature both teams, the men and the women, facing off against Division I opponents. Head coach Lane Lord and the Pitt State women's team will head to Lincoln, Nebraska for an exhibition game against the University of Nebraska on October 29th, while head coach Kevin Muff and the men's team will head to Wichita State on November 5th for their exhibition game against the Shockers. And in other news, the Pitt State men's and women's cross-country teams competed at the annual MIAA Championships this past weekend in Maryville, Missouri. The Gorilla women's team came up just short of defending their conference title from a year ago, placing 3rd, while the men's team garnered a 7th place finish. In all, the Gorillas ended the race with 5 All-MIAA performers, with Kaylee Tamont, Casey Epps, and Alex Mose earning honorable mention for the women's team, while Ethan Solovsky and Devon Young earn honorable mention for the men. And as usual, we'll have to recap the action from Gorilla football this weekend, where the team dropped their 2nd straight game in 2 weeks, this time to the Missouri Western Griffins, in a 63-14 loss on the Gorillas' homecoming game. The game was played in front of a stadium record crowd of nearly 12,000 fans, with the Gorillas' 2 scores coming on an early touchdown pass from Anthony Abinoa to John Brown in the first quarter, and a late rushing score added by Trez Tillman in the 4th. The loss sets the Gorillas' record at 5-2 on the season and landed them in the number 22 slot in the AFCA College Football Division II National Polls. That's about all the time we have for this week's edition of the Gorilla 2-Minute Drill. Once again, I'm your host Jake Faber for Pitt State Athletics, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter and look us up on YouTube. And if you're still hungry for more Gorilla Athletics videos, don't forget to join Gorilla Access. We'll see you next time. Their game against the Lions on Wednesday night would prove to be a tight one. With the Gorillas leading by 3 in the closing minute of the game, it was Bridget Hesser who would come off the bench to deliver the dagger for Pitt State on a floating 2-point bucket that put the game out of reach. And while the Gorillas bench was key in the win, it was Lizzie Geronimus who would shine. She came into the game battling illness, but it did not show one bit. She finished the night leading all scorers with 24 points and leading the Gorillas to a 66-63 hard-fought win. Against Fort Hays on Saturday, the Gorillas' offense was paced by sophomore Morgan Westhoff, who dropped a team-high 14 points, shooting 3 for 5 from long range. But after the Gorillas trailed the Tigers for almost all of the second half, the game ultimately came down to a layup by Geronimus with 20 seconds left that gave the Gorillas a 2-point edge and propelled them to a 51-48 victory.
We tried to cross the guards, making them think we were going to get it to one of them, but it was going to Lizzie the whole time, and we just shot her up for an isolation, ISO, and she does what she always does. She makes big plays in crunch time, and we got that one over Lehman, 6-4. I mean, she went right at her and willed that ball to go in, and it did.
The 2 wins on the week moved the Gorillas to 6-2 in conference play and set them in a 3-way tie for second place in the MIAA. Head coach Lane Lord and the Gorilla women will have 3 days to rest before they head to Tahlequah, Oklahoma on Wednesday night, where they're set to face off against conference opponent Northeastern State at 5:30 p.m. Reporting for Pittsburg State Athletics, I'm Jake Faber. In 2011, the Pittsburg State men's basketball team exceeded expectations, making it to the championship round of the MIAA postseason tournament as a number 7 seed. This year, head coach Kevin Muff hopes to continue that momentum, and it all began here in John Lance Arena tonight when the Gorillas took on the Baker University Wildcats in their season opener. After going on a 10-1 run to start the game, the Gorillas took full advantage of their first contest on their new home floor, ending the night with an 88-67 win and a 1-0 start to their season. The Gorillas were paced on offense by senior Rico Piravelis, who dropped a game-high 20 points, 18 of which came in the first half. Piravelis finished the game 1 rebound shy of a double-double and was a perfect 2 for 2 from long range. Newcomers A.J. Adams and Caleb Porter would round out the Gorillas in double figures, contributing 16 points apiece, with Adams recording a double-double with 10 boards as well. Saturday, September 8th, Pittsburg State football with their home opener against the University of Central Oklahoma. And after a big win on the road last week in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Anthony Abinoa and the Gorillas were looking to take some of that momentum into the second game of the season, and doing so in style, coming out of the tunnel sporting a new addition to their 2012 wardrobe, a blacked-out helmet. Let's kick things off early in the first quarter. On their first possession, the Gorillas were getting it done on the ground, with Bryson Wilson ripping off a 35-yard run here, followed by a 17-yard rush by Abinoa to set the Gorillas up near the goal line. And a few plays later, Abinoa would connect with Bradley Argabright in the end zone. That's the first touchdown catch of Argabright's career, and the Gorillas lead it 7-0 early. A few drives later, the Gorillas would take a 10-0 lead after a Connor Frizzell field goal, and a 3-and-out on the Broncos' ensuing drive would take us to the end of the first quarter. And early in the second, Abinoa and the Gorillas would continue their offensive success, as Abinoa would find John Brown early in the drive, this time for a big gain of 37 yards. And a few plays later, Abinoa would keep it himself, scampering 18 yards into the end zone and giving the Gorillas a 17-0 lead. The Broncos would score on their next drive to make it 17-7, but a few drives later, the Gorillas would respond in a big way, as Bryson Wilson would take the handoff, get near the goal line, and literally hurdle over a UCO defender into the end zone for 6, drawing an enormous reaction from the sellout crowd at Kearney Smith.